He stood across the competition floor holding a perfect tarte au citron, and I wanted to beat him more than I had ever wanted anything. We had been rivals for 3 years. Every award, every review, every coveted feature had been a battle between us. But that afternoon, something shifted, and I was not prepared. If this story fills your heart, please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another one. I need to tell you something about the kind of person I was before any of this happened. I was precise. I was disciplined. I was the kind of baker who weighed ingredients to the 10th of a gram and kept a notebook beside every oven with times, temperatures, and results logged in handwriting so small it required a second look to read. I had been this way since culinary school, and I had never once considered that it might be a limitation. My name is Bastian Lowe. I was 36 years old, and I owned a small but well-regarded bakery called Lowe & Crumb in the Tremont neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland is not a city people expect to find serious pastry culture, which was precisely why I had chosen it 8 years earlier when I left my position at a hotel restaurant in Chicago. I wanted to build something. I wanted to be the best in a place where best actually meant something you had fought for, not inherited. Tremont was good to me. It was an old neighborhood, close-packed houses and wide porches and streets that curved in ways that made no geometric sense, full of artists and young families and people who had stayed when others left and were quietly proud of that fact. My bakery was in a converted corner storefront with original tin ceilings and windows that fogged on cold mornings. I opened at 7. I was always there by 4. I had built a reputation over 8 years for technically flawless work. My croissants were laminated to exactly the right number of layers. My entremets were architectural. A food magazine out of Columbus had once described my work as ruthlessly precise and quietly beautiful, and I had put that quote in a frame and hung it in my kitchen, which tells you something about me that I was not yet ready to examine. For 3 years, the only name that mattered in the Cleveland independent pastry scene besides my own was Gideon Holt. He had opened his place, a bakery called Tender Crumb, in the Ohio City neighborhood across the river, about 15 minutes from me by car. He had arrived from a stint in San Francisco with a reputation that preceded him and a style that was the near opposite of mine. Where I was structured and architectural, Gideon was instinctive and expressive. His pastries looked like they had been made by someone who trusted their hands more than their measurements. His croissants had more irregular layers than mine. His tarts were filled in a way that suggested abundance rather than control, and people adored them. The food press adored him specifically. He won a regional recognition award in his first year. A Cleveland lifestyle magazine ran a full profile on him with a photograph that showed him laughing in his kitchen, flour on his forearm, looking entirely at ease in a way that I found professionally irritating. We had met formally exactly twice before the competition. The first time was at a culinary industry event at a hotel downtown where we had shaken hands and exchanged precisely calibrated pleasantries. He was tall, olive-skinned, with dark eyes that seemed to be taking in more than they let on, and he had a quality of stillness about him that I found, in an unexamined way, slightly unsettling. The second meeting was at a farmer's market pop-up where we had both been invited to sell. We ended up with adjacent tables which neither of us had arranged and neither of us mentioned. We were professional and courteous. Our customers occasionally looked between our tables comparing. I watched him interact with people and noted that he talked to each customer as if they were the only person at the market. I found this tactic interesting and filed it away without feeling anything further about it. That was the complete history between Gideon Holt and me when the Ohio Independent Culinary Excellence competition was announced in late September. It was a significant event. A panel of 5 judges, including 2 from out of state, would evaluate 12 independent food businesses across northeastern Ohio over a single weekend in November. The categories included savory, beverage, and pastry. The pastry category was what mattered to me. First place came with a cash prize, a feature in a national food publication, and a supply partnership that would reduce my ingredient costs substantially for 2 years. It was, in practical terms, the most important competition of my professional life, and Gideon had registered. Of course he had. I began preparing in October with the same methodology I applied to everything. I chose 3 showcase pieces. I tested each one a minimum of 12 times. I kept detailed notes on every variation, every failure, every improvement. I sourced the finest butter I could obtain from a small dairy operation in Wayne County. I flew in specific vanilla from a supplier in Wisconsin. I treated the competition like a military campaign. My prep cook, a young woman named Iris who had been with me for 2 years and who had the rare gift of knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet, watched me work through the 4th week of testing and said, very carefully, "Chef, do you think maybe we've got it already?" "We'll know when it's right," I told her. She did not say anything else, but I noticed her expression. The competition was held on a Saturday in November at the Great Lakes Exhibition Hall near the lakefront. It was a cold morning, the kind of cold that Cleveland does without ceremony, a flat gray sky and wind off Lake Erie that went straight through you and kept going. I arrived early, set up my station, and arranged my tools with the same precision I used every morning at 4 in my own kitchen. I was arranging my offset spatulas when I felt the presence of someone at the station to my left. I looked up. Gideon Holt. Of course. Adjacent stations, as if the universe had a sense of humor. He was unpacking a worn canvas bag, setting out his own tools in a way that was unhurried and slightly improvised looking, things placed where they seemed convenient rather than where they were optimal. He wore a white chef's coat with no embroidery, just clean and plain. He looked up when he felt me looking. "Lo," he said. Not unfriendly. Just direct. "Holt," I said, in the same register. He almost smiled. "May the best tart win." I turned back to my station and said nothing, which was, I would later understand, the least useful response available to me. The competition ran in 2 judged rounds with a break between them. The first round was a set piece, a specific item each competitor had to produce under observation. For the pastry category, it was a classic French tart shell with a filling of the competitor's choosing. This was deliberate on the organizer's part. The tart shell is foundational. There is nowhere to hide in a tart shell. I made a tarte aux framboises, raspberry tart, with a frangipane base and a mirror glaze that caught the exhibition hall lighting in a way I had specifically calculated. It was, by every technical measure I knew how to apply, perfect. Gideon made a tarte au citron, lemon tart, the simplest possible choice. No glaze, no decoration beyond a few small pieces of candied zest placed with what looked like carelessness. I glanced over at it when the judging panel moved to his station, and I felt a flicker of something I immediately dismissed as competitive focus. The judges spent longer at his station than at mine. I noted this without reacting. During the break between rounds, the competitors were free to move around the hall. I stayed at my station and reviewed my notes for the second round. I was aware of Gideon leaving his station and returning after about 20 minutes. I did not ask where he had gone. Then something happened that I had not prepared for. He stopped at my station on his way back and looked at my display piece. He studied it for a moment with that quality of attention he had, the stillness I had noticed before. Then he said, "Your glaze work is extraordinary. I've never gotten a mirror glaze to sit that cleanly." I looked at him. I was prepared for strategy, for competitive pleasantry, for professional indifference. I was not prepared for what sounded plainly like a genuine compliment. "Thank you," I said, because there was nothing else honest to say. He nodded. He looked at the tart for another moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something? What are you thinking about when you work? Like, what's in your head?" The question was so unexpected that I answered it without thinking. "Precision," I said. "Correctness. Getting it exactly right." He looked at me then, not unkindly, but with an expression I could not quite read. He said, just that. And then he went back to his station. I spent the rest of the break staring at my notes and not reading a single word on the page. The second round results were announced at 4 in the afternoon. Gideon Holt placed first in the pastry category. I placed second. The margin, the judges noted in their brief public comments, was a question of emotional resonance in the tasting experience. His lemon tart had made one judge think of her grandmother's kitchen. Mine had made the panel deeply respectful. I packed up my station with complete composure. I congratulated Gideon because I was a professional and because he had won fairly. He accepted the congratulations with a quietness that was not gloating and not false modesty. It was simply genuine. In the parking lot, walking to my car alone in the November cold with Lake Erie invisible but audible somewhere beyond the hall, I had a thought that I could not push away. He had asked me what was in my head when I worked, and I had said precision and correctness, and not one person in that judging panel had used either of those words to describe what they felt eating my food. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I started the engine, and I thought about the word resonance, what it meant, and what it might mean that I did not have it. I drove home. I did not know yet that everything was about to change, but something had already started. Quiet and slow, like a change in temperature you feel before you can name it. I did not call Gideon. I did not reach out in any way. That was not who I was. I went back to my bakery on Monday morning at 4, turned on the ovens, and worked. But something was different, and I could not bake it away. The thought that had started in the parking lot kept returning. Precision and correctness. I had spent 8 years perfecting a craft that people admired but did not apparently feel. A food writer admires technique. A grandmother remembers her kitchen. Those are different things, and for the first time in 8 years, I was honestly uncertain which one I had been chasing. Iris noticed. She did not say anything directly, which was one of her gifts. But she started leaving small things in the kitchen. A jar of local honey from a farm stand near her apartment. A branch of dried rosemary she had found somewhere and thought smelled interesting. She placed them near the workspace without comment, as if they had simply appeared there, and waited to see what I would do. I left them where they were for 3 days. On the 4th day, I used the honey in a pâte de fruit I was testing, and it changed the entire character of the piece in a way my precise recipe had not anticipated and could not have predicted. It was better. I was irritated by how much better it was. 2 weeks after the competition, I received an email from the organizing committee. They were assembling a small winter pop-up market in early December, a curated indoor market at a venue in the Gordon Square Arts District. And they were inviting the top pastry competitors to participate alongside several other food vendors. Would I be interested? I was. When I arrived at the venue the following Saturday morning to set up, I found that the market layout had placed my table directly across a narrow aisle from Gideon's. I looked at the layout. I looked at his table. I looked at the volunteer coordinator who had handed me the map and who was already moving on to the next vendor. I set up my table. The market opened at 10. The venue was warm and smelled of pine boughs someone had arranged near the entrance, and the Gordon Square crowd arrived in their coats and scarves. Families and couples and older residents who knew the neighborhood the way you only know a place you have chosen to stay in for a long time. The sound was good. Conversation and laughter and the particular energy of people who are happy to be somewhere. I sold well. My display was clean and precise, items arranged with intention and symmetry, signage clear and professional. Customers responded to it. They were respectful and appreciative. But across the aisle, something different was happening. Gideon's table was slightly less organized than mine. Items displayed with a kind of confident informality. Small handwritten cards beside each piece with notes that were not just descriptions, but small stories. I could see one from where I stood. Brown butter financier. The smell of a warm kitchen on a cold afternoon. That was all it said. And people stopped at it and picked it up and read it and smiled before they had even tasted anything. He talked to people the way I had noticed at the farmer's market. Fully present, unhurried, genuinely interested. An older man in a heavy coat asked him something, and Gideon leaned forward and listened, and then said something that made the man laugh and reach for his wallet. I watched this between my own interactions. I was not proud of how carefully I was watching. During a mid-morning lull, Gideon walked across the aisle and stood in front of my display. He studied the pieces with the same attentive stillness from the competition. "Your Queen Yaman is the best I've seen outside of Brittany," he said. Genuinely, I had not expected him to cross the aisle. I had not expected a second genuine compliment. I was finding his sincerity increasingly difficult to process. "Your cards are effective," I said. It was the most honest thing I could offer in return, and I meant it. He smiled at that. It was a different smile than the almost smile from the competition. It reached more of his face. I learned that from my grandmother, he said. She always said that food without a story is just fuel. I thought about that. My training was very technique-focused, I said. And I heard something in my own voice that I had not heard before, a small acknowledgement that this might have been a limitation. He heard it too. He looked at me with an expression that was careful and kind. Your technique is something I study, he said. And that seriously. I have tried to get my lamination to look like yours for 2 years. There was a silence between us that was not uncomfortable. That was the most surprising part. I'm not sure technique is enough, I said, and saying it aloud was different from thinking it in a parking lot alone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Do you want to get coffee after this closes? There's a place 2 blocks up on Detroit Avenue that's worth the walk. I said yes before I had time to decide whether I was going to. The market closed at 4. We packed up our respective tables and walked up Detroit Avenue in the early December dark. Past the lit windows of the old storefronts and the string lights that someone had put up along the block, and the cold was present but not punishing. The kind of cold that makes the warmth of wherever you are going feel like something to look forward to. The coffee shop was called Fieldstone, small and warm, exposed brick walls hung with local artwork, mismatched chairs and good light from pendant lamps. We ordered and sat at a table near the window, and outside, the street was dark and bright at the same time the way Cleveland streets are in December. The cold making everything crisp and the lights making everything amber. We talked for 2 hours. I want to tell you that carefully, because I think you should understand what 2 hours meant. I am not someone who talks easily. I am thorough and considered in professional conversation and fairly sparse in personal conversation, a habit built over years of living alone in the discipline of early mornings and detailed work. Talking had never felt like something I was particularly good at or particularly needed. With Gideon, it was different. He asked real questions and waited for real answers, not the performing kind of waiting, but the actual kind. And he offered real answers in return, things that felt considered and honest rather than curated. He told me about his grandmother in New Mexico, the one whose kitchen wisdom had shaped everything about how he thought about food. She had been a home baker, entirely untrained, who made things by feel and smell and instinct and love, and whose food had made everyone who ate it feel held. He had tried for years to understand technically what she did that created that feeling, and he had finally understood that it was not a technique. It was an intention. She cooked for people. Not for judges, not for recognition. For the specific people she loved. I carry that, he said. Every time I work, I'm thinking about someone real. Someone I want the food to reach. I sat with that for a moment. I think about execution, I said. I think about whether it's correct. And is it? He said, not challenging. Genuinely asking, yes, I said. It's always correct. But you place second, he said. And then immediately, I'm sorry. That was too direct. No, I said. It's accurate. And I've been thinking about it every day since. He looked at me across the small table. The pendant lamp above us made the light warm and close. Can I tell you what I think? He said. Please, I said. I think you know more about pastry than almost anyone I've met, he said. I think your instincts are extraordinary, but you don't trust them. I think you use precision as a way of not having to feel anything while you work. And I think that when you finally let yourself make something for someone, really for someone, it's going to be unlike anything you've ever produced. I did not know what to say. I was not accustomed to being seen that clearly by someone I had considered an adversary. How do you know that? I asked. Because of the honey financier you had at the far end of your display today, he said. I watched 3 different people eat it, and all 3 of them closed their eyes. You made that one differently. I could tell. He was right. That was the one I had made with Iris's honey. The one I had not planned. We sat in Fieldstone until they began stacking chairs around us, which is the universal language for it is time to go. We walked back to our cars through the December dark, and our breath made small. Clouds in the cold air, and neither of us rushed. At the corner, where we had to separate toward different parking spots, he stopped and turned to face me. I'd like to do this again, he said. Not the competition part. This part. I looked at him. The street light was above and behind him, and I could see his expression clearly, and what was in it was not strategy or performance. It was simply honesty. I would too, I said. He held my gaze for a moment. Good, he said. And then he smiled, the full one, and turned and walked toward his car. And I stood on the corner in the cold, watching him go, and understanding that something had shifted in my chest in a way that had nothing to do with pastry. But there was something I had not told him yet. Something about my professional situation that was going to complicate everything that seemed to be beginning. And I did not know how much longer I could keep it to myself. The thing I had not told Gideon was this. Low and Crumb was in financial trouble. Not catastrophic trouble, not the kind that comes from recklessness, but the slow and grinding kind that comes from 8 years of prioritizing quality over margin, from sourcing the finest ingredients and paying my small staff fairly and keeping my prices at a point I believed was honest. While the rent on my Tremont storefront had increased 3 times in 4 years as the neighborhood gentrified around me, I had been managing it, carefully the way I managed everything. But I was managing it the way you manage a slow leak, with constant attention and no real solution. The prize money from the competition would have helped. Significantly. Second place had come with a modest amount that I was grateful for, but it was not what first place would have meant. First place would have given me room to breathe. I had not told anyone except my accountant, a methodical and kindly man named Everett who met with me monthly and delivered difficult numbers with the gentleness of a doctor. I had not told Iris, though I suspected she had noticed things. I had certainly not told Gideon Holt, who was my competitor, and who, until 6 weeks ago, had been nothing else. The week after our coffee at Fieldstone, we met again, by arrangement this time. He suggested a walk along the lakefront on a Tuesday afternoon when both our bakeries were closed. We met at Edgewater Park, where the lake was gray and enormous in December, the beach empty and the water moving in slow dark swells that made the whole horizon look serious and real. We walked for an hour and a half. We talked about flavor philosophy and the difference between French and Japanese pastry traditions, and a book about bread fermentation that we had both independently read and had different opinions about. We talked about our families and why we had chosen this work and what it meant to us beyond the professional identity. He told me about coming out to his family at 24, a process that had been imperfect and uncomfortable and ultimately, several years later, genuinely loving. His younger brother, he said, had been the easiest, had shown up at his apartment 2 days later with a bottle of wine and said, "I just want you to know I'm here." He said that with a softness that told me how much that moment had meant. I told him about my own experience. Quieter and slower, a family that had not been cruel but had taken more time than I would have wished before they found their way to understanding. I told him about the years in between when I had made my work my entire world, not as an escape exactly, but as a place where I was in control of outcomes, where if I was precise enough and disciplined enough, the result was correct. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "That makes complete sense. And I wonder if that's why your food is technically perfect, but the warmth is still finding its way out." I stopped walking. The lake moved beside us, patient and cold. "You think there's warmth in there?" I said. "I think there's enormous warmth in there," he said. "I think you've been protecting it." I looked at the lake for a moment. "I might be about to lose my bakery," I said. It came out before I had decided to say it. 8 years of not telling anyone, and then it was just out there on the lakefront in December, plain and exposed. He did not react with alarm or pity. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing it. Then he said, "Tell me." So I did. I told him about the rent increases and the margin pressure and the accounting conversations with Everett and the way I had been calculating each month's ingredients against projected sales with the same obsessive precision I brought to laminated dough. I told him that I had another 4 or 5 months before the decisions became unavoidable. He listened to all of it. The lake kept moving. "Okay," he said when I had finished. "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it as one baker talking to another and not as anything else yet," I said. "I have more space than I need at Tender Crumb," he said. "My kitchen is large. I have a second prep area I use for storage that could function as a real workspace. I've thought about a collaborative arrangement before, bringing in another voice, but I hadn't found the right person." He paused. "I think you might be the right person." I looked at him. You're offering to share your kitchen. I'm offering to explore what that could look like, he said carefully. No pressure. No immediate decisions. Just a conversation. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because it is important. I felt the thing I always felt when something went outside my control. The instinct to pull back, to manage, to find a way to keep my hands on the terms. 8 years of discipline and precision and self-containment were right there, ready to construct a polite and professional decline. But underneath that, something else was present. Something that had been present since a parking lot in November, growing quietly every time I was in the same space as this man. Why? I said. You won. You don't need anything from me professionally. He looked at me steadily. I didn't say professionally, he said. The lake was very loud for a moment. Then it wasn't. Then it was just cold air and winter light in Gideon's face, open and honest and waiting. I need to think, I said. Take your time, he said. And he meant it, I thought, for 2 weeks. I met with Everett and laid out the numbers with complete honesty for the first time, including the full picture rather than the managed version. I walked through my bakery early in the mornings and looked at the tin ceilings and the fogged windows and the kitchen where I had built 8 years of careful work, and I asked myself what I was actually trying to protect. The building or what the building had come to mean? Those are different questions. I thought about what Gideon had said on the lake. I think you've been protecting it. The warmth. I thought about the honey financier and the 3 people who had closed their eyes. I called him on a Thursday evening. I want to talk about the arrangement. I said, come to the bakery Saturday morning, he said. I'll make breakfast. I drove to Ohio City on a Saturday morning in early January. Through streets that were quiet and snow-edged, past the West Side Market with its great arched windows steamed against the cold. Tender Crumb was on a side street near the market, in a building with a painted wood sign above the door and the kind of worn front step that means people have been arriving here and finding it worth arriving at for a long time. He let me in before they were open to the public. The kitchen smelled of warm butter and citrus and something I could not immediately name that I later identified as cardamom. He had made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast and small pastries, set out at the wide work table in the kitchen like a simple and generous thing. We ate and we talked through what a collaboration might look like, practically and professionally. He showed me the second prep area. It was good space, well lit, with equipment that was maintained and walls that were clean. Not as arranged as my kitchen, more lived in, but good. We talked about the terms, about how product lines could remain distinct, how we could share ingredient sourcing costs, how the arrangement could be reviewed and renegotiated. It was a real conversation, an adult conversation between 2 people who respected each other's work and were trying to build something honest. At the end of it, he said, "There's one more thing." "What?" I said. "I want to teach you something," he said. "Not technique. You don't need technique. I want to teach you how I think when I work. The person I'm making it for, the specific memory I'm trying to reach. I want you to try it once, just once, and see what happens." I looked at him across the work table, in the good light of his kitchen, with the morning outside the windows going white and quiet with new snow. "And in return," I said, "you teach me your lamination," he said simply. I considered this an exchange, neither of us arriving with nothing, neither of us being asked to disappear into the other's way of working. Just 2 people with different strengths agreeing to share them. "All right," I said. The first time I tried his method, he stood beside me at the work table and asked me one question before I touched anything. He said, "Who are you making this for?" "Not a customer. A specific person. Someone real." I thought about it seriously. I thought about Iris, who had worked beside me for 2 years in a kitchen where I had not always been easy to work beside, who had left honey on the counter without explanation and asked nothing in return. "My prep cook," I said. "Iris. What does she love?" He said. "Warmth," I said, and I realized as I said it that I knew this about her and had never acted on it. "She's always cold. She drinks 3 cups of tea before noon. She keeps a small heater under the prep station." He nodded. "Make her something warm," he said. "Not warm as a flavor. Warm as a feeling." I made a brown butter and pear tart with a filling that was softer than I would have allowed before. Not imprecise, but generous, with the kind of yield that meant warmth rather than structure. I used the local honey. I did not check my temperature log after the first reading. I worked by smell for the last 10 minutes, the way Gideon's grandmother had apparently always worked, and it frightened me a little and also felt like setting something down that I had been carrying a long way. When it came out of the oven, Gideon cut a small piece and tasted it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me. "That's it," he said. "That's the thing I've been waiting to see from you." Iris tasted it that Monday when I brought it to the bakery. She took one bite and looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, surprised and moved and a little uncertain what to do with the feeling. "Chef," she said, "what did you do differently?" "I made it for you," I said. She looked at me for another moment. Then she went back to her work, blinking a little more than usual. I called Gideon that evening. "Not about the arrangement. Not about pastry. The tart worked," I said. "I know," he said. "I could hear it in the way you were working." "I want to tell you something," I said. Not as one baker to another. There was a pause. "I'm listening," he said. "I have thought about very little else since the competition," I said. "Since the parking lot, actually. I sat in my car for 10 minutes in the cold and I thought about what you asked me. What's in your head when you work? And the answer you got was the professional answer. The real answer was that I didn't know yet. But I'm starting to." He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. "What is it?" he said. "Someone worth making it for?" I said. Another pause. Longer. Then, "Bastian?" "Yeah," I said. "Come back Saturday," he said. "We'll make something together." We did. The thing we made together was better than either of us would have made alone. Technically precise and emotionally present at once. The two approaches finding a language between them that neither of us had spoken before. Over the months that followed, we built the collaboration carefully, the way you build things you want to last. The shared kitchen arrangement took shape with the kind of patience that comes from two people who both understand that good things require time and attention and the willingness to fail in front of each other. We merged our ingredient sourcing and saved money. We developed a small seasonal menu that carried both our names and was written up in 2 regional publications in the spring. Low and Crumb found new life. Not as a storefront. I let that lease go without grief when the time came. But as a brand with a home inside a partnership that was producing the best work of my professional life. And something else found its life too. Something that had begun in a parking lot and grown through December walks and honest conversations and mornings in a shared kitchen where we were teaching each other to see differently. On a Saturday in April, after the Saturday morning rush at Tender Crumb, we sat on the back step of the kitchen in the thin spring light with coffee and the last of a batch of Queen Yaman that had come out better than any I had ever made. The Ohio City streets were quiet in the late morning, birds somewhere nearby, the air soft in the way Cleveland air gets in April, as if surprised by its own warmth. Gideon ate the last piece and was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother would have liked this one," I said. He looked at me. The morning was full of light. "She would have loved you," he said. She liked people who were worth the effort of understanding. I thought about the person I had been in November. Precise and correct and quietly closed. I thought about a parking lot and a word, resonance, sitting in me like a question I had not known how to answer. I thought about the honey on the counter that Iris left without explanation. The 3 people closing their eyes. The lake in December, serious and real. "I used to think love was something you got right," I said. "Like a lamination, like a glaze. If the technique was perfect, the result would be correct." He looked at me, patient and warm, waiting. "I think it's more like the honey," I said. "You don't measure it. You just use enough." He reached over and covered my hand with his in the thin April sun, and the birds kept on somewhere nearby and the street was quiet. And the kitchen behind us smelled of butter and cardamom and the good work of the morning, and I understood finally, sitting on that back step in Ohio City, with a man who had taught me more about myself than any competition ever had, that the most important thing I had ever made had nothing to do with technique at all. It had everything to do with who I was making it for, and I was not afraid of that anymore.